Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here in Lab 5. We're going to be addressing one of the most pressing issues humanity is facing today, and that is the future of our global food system. As you know, we have a rapidly growing population, we have the impacts of climate change, resource scarcity, and urgent need for sustainable production. And that is because hunger remains a very stark reality for many of us on this planet. 733 million people, 1 in 11 around the world, facing food insecurity in 2023. So we've got a team of fantastic people who are developing and investing in the future of food technology to build a sustainable future for all. I'm going to welcome up to the stage from the PIF, the head of consumer goods and retail sector, direct investments, Majed Alassaf. He's going to sit right here. Mariana Vasconcelos, the CEO of AgriSmart. Joseph Rehmann, founder and group CEO of Victory Farms. Federico Trucco, CEO of Bioceres Crop. And Fernando Vilela de Creos, CEO of Minerva Foods. Welcome to you all. Okay, so we have the future of the 5 food groups represented here today. We have a fisherman, we have some farmers, and we've got cattle ranchers, and we also have an investor. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
The scale of the challenge I already mentioned. So I want to hear, first of all, from our founders and CEOs. Tell us, first of all, what do you do? And specifically, how does it create a more resilient, equitable, and sustainable future for all? Mariana.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm founder at AgriSmart. In AgriSmart, we work with over 100,000 farmers in Latin America by monitoring their crops and helping them to make better decisions so they become more resilient. The results have been that we can increase yielding up to 20% while reducing input and energy consumption in 40% and water in 60%. That's mostly on the mitigation side. And when you talk about adaptation and resilience, we have been supporting them through the floods in Rio Grande do Sul and the wildfires that are spread Brazil and Argentina by alerting them on time to react. With all of that information of these 48 million hectares that we work with, we leverage risk analysis for banks and traders.
All right, Joseph, what about you?
Yes, thank you very much. My name is Joe Rehmann. I'm the founder and CEO for Victory Farms. We are building a food solution for Africa with the lowest cost protein. So lowest financial cost, but also environmental cost through regenerative practices. And so I think it's been well covered, the acute shortage of nutrition globally, but also in Africa. But on the regenerative side, we're also targeting to be the first global player in fish that's both climate positive, which is carbon negative, and biodiversity positive.
Federico.
Thanks, Eddie. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Federico Trucco. I'm a scientist and also the CEO of a company called Bioceres. We operate in the ag inputs space. So we develop technologies for farmers to improve the productivity of their major row crops. And in doing so, we are trying to tackle 2 major themes. We are trying to address climate change, and we're developing seeds that can better withstand drought or weather extremes. And we're globally known for the first technology in the drought-tolerant space that we're commercializing in the Americas. And also the other major trend we are addressing with our portfolio of solutions is the substitution of chemicals. Now, there's a big pressure to move away from synthetic chemistries in high-productivity agriculture, and the way to do that is by sourcing molecules from nature, from plants, from insects, or microorganisms that we can engineer into new solutions that are equally efficacious but have a lower environmental impact.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, Fernando.
Good afternoon. I'm the CEO of Minerva Foods. We are a company that is based in Brazil, but we have operations in Argentina, Uruguay, Paraguay, Colombia, Chile, and Australia. Basically, what we do is that we export beef and lamb to 100 countries all over the world. The reason for being geographic diversified is to guarantee the stability of supply in order to arbitrate one origin versus the other, guaranteeing the markets that we serve, always the consistency of the supply.
Okay, we also have an investor here. Tell us where the PIF is putting its money. Where are the places where you see the most interesting investments to be made in the future of food?
I think that's a great question. I think future of foods is a big topic, and we're looking at the value chain. We see many elements of the value chains and different dimensions. So we see a lot of emerging technologies. We see emerging technologies when it comes to farming. That's very interesting. And also we see a lot of technologies when it comes to cultivation of proteins. So there is no specific technology we're looking at, and there is no specific interesting technology. It's a wide sector with a lot of technologies, and the future, we see it enabled by technology as well.
And specifically, you've got some money in vertical farming, right?
Yes.
And high-tech greenhouses.
Yes, yes, yes.
Alternative meats.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Growing feedstock as well.
Yes.
Is that right? Anything in there you'd pick out just to point at?
No, I think if we look back, why are we adapting these technologies? As today we're facing a lot of challenges when it comes to water scarcity, availability of land, and the climate. So for example, green dunes vertical farming we have today is solving a lot of the challenges when we're faced by these three elements. So we can grow our crops anywhere, anytime, at any climate. And that's one of the technologies, and hopefully we can touch base other technologies today in the discussion.
I'd love to know how fast you guys think you could scale what you're doing. I laid out the challenge about how many people are going hungry at the moment. I wonder, Federico, if I said international trade, no problem, how fast could you scale what you're doing and get some of those seeds out to the places that need it?
Well, it's unfortunately not as fast as other sectors, no? In technology, in IT, you can get things rolling in weeks. When you work with living organisms like crops, you need to go through biological cycles, no? And from one seed, you might get 300 seeds, and then so on and so forth. And once you have a technology incorporated into a variety that farmers might plant in Argentina, then that variety might not work in Brazil or in the United States. So you need to convert that into every single variety that farmers are used to planting around the globe. So it takes many, many years. It takes 7 to 10 years to get a product in the market. Now, the good news is that the lifetime of the technology is much longer. No?
Okay.
So technologies that have been launched in the 90s are still being commercialized today. So from an investment viewpoint, it takes a long time. These are $100 million investments on a per product basis. But once you make it, the runway, it's maybe multiple decades.
Okay. Fernando, did you want to come in on that? About the question of scale. How fast could you scale what you're doing?
Well, we are escalating very fast. Minerva has as a strategy of being the leading player in the region that we select, that we believe that's the most competitive region in the world, that's South America. We've been going through acquisitions, and just 2 days ago, we conclude the biggest acquisition, increasing our volume in about 40% and making us the leader on beef exports out of South America. Today, we are responsible for something around 35% of all the beef exported out of South America. And consider that South America is around 40% of the global exports. That makes us to have 13 to 14% of the total exports. And again, the reason for doing that is because we can have the protein, the red protein, beef and lamb, in a more affordable way for the final consumers anywhere in the world that there is demand.
Let's stick with the protein, and Joe, come to you. You use an amazing group of people to sell your product, and that actually has its own sustainability story within it as well. Tell me about the market ladies who sell the fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So we sell fish to tens of thousands of market ladies across East Africa, and the way we support them is through a non-electrified cold chain. And so for these market ladies, they struggle to make ends meet, and they operate in very harsh conditions. And so we provide fresh and affordable fish that they can go and trade out to their to their end customers. So it creates a lot of job creation and follow on from that.
And the data that you generate is actually, I mean, the market ladies are amazing, but the data that you generate is actually better than them in predicting how much fish they're going to sell. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've developed so we run cold chain in a part of the world where it's almost impossible to run cold chain. And as I mentioned, it's non-electrified. And as
cold chain means you don't have refrigerated trucks, is that right?
We don't have refrigerated trucks. So we're basically timing how much time we have from it leaving we do have one point of cooling, but from there, it's got to sell quickly.
Okay, the clock is ticking.
So we've developed an AI model. My co-founder's from Stanford, and he's the tech guru, not me. But we've developed an AI model, so we can predict across the thousands of customers we have across East Africa how much fish each of them will buy tomorrow. And so then our non-electrified cold chain supplies these thousands of ladies with fish just in time for them to be able to grab it, throw it in the fryer, and serve it that evening.
Mari, tell us about the data that you're collecting and using, and some of the unusual ways that you're finding it's being used.
Well, we have one of the largest data sets of climate and agronomic data in Latin America, and we have been using a lot of AI with machine learning and deep learning for agronomic models. But we are now taking a new step on how we can combine all of that climate information, the sustainability information to know if they comply with the rules for exports, and pricing and market share to understand risk of commodities that support traders to price better their negotiations. So like the generative AI is what allowed us to take this step on orchestrating all of these different modules to solve more complex problems.
Majed, how are you using data? How are some of your portfolio companies using data? And what are some of the more surprising things that they're finding from it?
So majority of our portfolio today is using a lot of data. And we're seeing today, for example, our farms in the southern province of Saudi, the Saudi Coffee Company, and the CEO sits over here, maybe he can answer this. But so today, the way we grow coffee is data-driven, efficiency with technology. And of course, learned a lot from Minerva with Fernando when it comes to data. They run farms globally, and they're using a lot of technology and data, which increases efficiency, reduces a lot of waste, and of course, with data, we can increase the crops as well.
Okay. Let's come back to Minerva and tell us about some of the data that you're using. And I'm interested in a surprising use that you found from the data.
Well, I think data is a vital part of our day-to-day. First, to map the supply. Many things interferes on our day-to-day, from climate change, from the behavior of the farmer. So we map that. But also in the demand side. So what's happening to each of the markets? How is the distribution of income? And how growth of GDP impacts the consumption? And it's very interesting because we are seeing that the biggest elasticity are coming from the developing countries. Once you increase the GDP, once you increase or you make it better distribution of income, this reflects into protein consumption, and beef and lamb are two of the proteins that react faster to that. So data is definitely a basic tool that we have for our day-to-day supply and demand scenarios.
Federico, tell us, you're a scientist, so you obviously deal with data. How fast can you iterate when you're designing, when you're inside the genome, designing what the changes you might make? How does data help you and AI help you redesign?
I think today most of the basic science is done in silico. So it's basically having the ability to do quantum computing on massive data lakes to predict target sites for herbicides, molecules that might interact with insects and prevent herbivory and stuff like that. So obviously, then all of that needs to be validated in the wet lab, in the field, with empirical data, but it has shortened the time for discovery. I think the data revolution in ag is however, not there, but it's rather in the way we make decisions in the field. I come from a farming family, and my father will make decisions by driving the pickup to the field, looking from the fence once a week and say, well, we need to spray, we maybe don't need to spray. Imagine that today we can have a satellite go over that field, maybe more than once a day, get sub-meter square resolution on that field, and have a level of prediction in terms of what's going on that is far superior to whatever my father would see from the fence. Now, if we can integrate that into our precision agriculture solutions, I think we for sure will do much better in the management of that ecosystem. And I think that's kind of the biggest opportunity in agriculture, is transitioning from the agriculture that we do today to in silico agriculture, if you will, by integrating the massive amount of data that comes from each meter square of an agricultural field. No?
And how close are we to that reality of being able to, around the world, I can imagine in a richer field, a richer country's field, meter by meter, but how fast are we away from being able to do that in a poorer country, for example?
How fast are we going to be able to do that where?
Take any poor country you like.
I think once the infrastructure is there, the value of incremental data is negligible.
Right.
I mean, you already have a constellation of low-orbiting satellites now. They can take pictures everywhere. The cost of that infrastructure, it's already there, and I think that makes it very scalable. So there is the opportunity to have that data be generated from places in Africa doesn't require independent incremental investments. So from that viewpoint, I think we are there. The ability to integrate data and have that sort of drive management decisions is what needs to be defined, and maybe we can be helped by AI in that process. And I think once we do that, we can unlock this opportunity for farmers globally, not just in the rich countries of the world.
Right. Mari, did you want to come in on that? Because I know you care quite deeply about financing some of the smaller holder farmers.
Yes, so I think for us to scale what Federico put as an ideal scenario, we face a lot of infrastructure issues, so connectivity is still an issue in many of the poor regions. Then we have education, from literacy to digital inclusion, how farmers will actually use those tools. And I think both of them can be supported in the solution through financing. So especially in Latin America, we depend a lot, we are leveraged on credit for buying inputs, but there is very few money being directed to transition. And when I talk about transition, I'm saying like transition to regenerative agriculture, implementing carbon projects, buying irrigation equipment, adopting those satellite imagery drones, or any technology out there. So we have a huge financing gap, and a big part of it's a chicken and egg problem, because they say we don't have data, because then how we can assess the risk to deploy capital to smallholder farms. But I think we are in a level where we do have data, and AI is there to help us fill in the gaps with that data, so we can hopefully drive more capital flow into transition.
Majed, do you want to come in on that, on driving capital flow to where it needs to go? Because I know the PIF does a lot of work here in Saudi, elsewhere in the region as well. Talk a little bit about some of the financing initiatives that you're seeing.
So I think, as you mentioned, I think data is very critical to drive these financing. So today, we're financing a lot of partnerships, a lot of transactions in the kingdom, regionally, internationally. Remotely, we have a lot of investments in South America, Brazil.
Give me an example of how that's helping, how one of those investments is helping.
So I think one of the key investments we have today is Minerva, where we're working jointly together in activities, not just in Brazil and South America, but to Australia as well. So we work together. These partnerships help secure red meats and proteins to the kingdom. We have other partnerships in Europe where we secured more than 20% of the wheat that we import in South today. So financing these operations is very critical for food security and for the success of achieving our objectives.
Let's talk about some of the issues that some of your technologies tackle, and I'm going to come to the audience in a moment, so get your questions ready for our folks. Joe, I live in the UK, where the salmon industry gets a lot of flack. Pollution, ecosystem damage, disease, sea lice, chemicals, fish meal. How is what you're doing different in terms of sustainability and providing protein to people that is helpful to them as well as the environment that it comes from?
That's a great question. And I think there's, very broadly, there's kind of a way to do things which is destructive to nature and communities and society. And there's a way to do it which is regenerative and promoting. And our vision is very much to have a regenerative system. We don't use antibiotics, there's no chemicals. We're biodiversity positive on land and water. And so I think if we have this view that we portray, which is there may be a high-income consumer in New York eating a salmon sandwich for $50, which is damaging the planet. And on the other side of the world, we're supplying a tilapia to a consumer who only earns $5 a day, and that's actually improving the planet. And so there's a lot of nuance to it, but we firmly believe there's a way to farm which actually is net positive for the planet and the communities it's in.
Interesting. Could you go to the salmon farmers in the UK and bring your technology to them? Is there something specifically wrong with what's happening there? Not that I'm asking you to throw the salmon farmers into the...
Fundamentally, we should not be farming non-indigenous species outside. So that creates a lot of environmental issues. So it's hard to change that structurally. But from a systems and sustainability standpoint and the traceability that we offer, definitely there's things that we hope that we can push on the salmon industry.
Let's stick with traceability because, and I want to come to Minerva Foods, because one of the issues that you tackle is around deforestation. So some of the cattle may go where they want, or some farmers may be tempted to cut down a few trees to expand their land. How do you make sure that you aren't taking cattle from those
first thing that 100% of our farmers, they are satellite monitored. So we know on a daily basis what is happening to the farms, if there are trees being cut. But I believe that there is something more important that we are doing, is that we are engaging the farmers. We are engaging our suppliers on producing more in less area. And the spare land that they have, they reforest, and we are the off-takers of carbon credits. The way of promoting the reforestation and zero deforestation is by giving the proper financial incentive for the farmers that are taking care of the forest.
Interesting. I want to ask Federico about crop resilience, and I know that you have a view on CRISPR. What do you think recent developments in gene editing technologies like CRISPR can do, and what role they can play in enhancing crop resilience? Is it enough?
Look, I am a big fan of anything that science might bring for us to move faster in this quest. I think gene editing technology is of great value. Understanding that you can only edit what's already written, no? Right. You cannot edit genes that do not exist within a species. So that's why you need genetic transformation. But for instance, for quality traits, if I want to make wheat have less gluten, or increase the fiber content, or increase its shelf life because I provide oxidative stability, those are things we can do by modifying specific nucleotides, editing the wheat genome, and that allows us to have a product in the market without having to go through the extensive regulatory review of a GMO. Now, if I want to put bovine myoglobin into soybeans,
right,
I need to do genetic engineering. Okay. And there's a company that has done that, soybean called Piggy. This is hog myoglobin, so it's called Piggy soy, where 25% of the total protein is actually coming from an animal gene. So for every ton of soybeans that you harvest in the field, you have 100 kilos of an animal protein. Now, you cannot do that through gene editing because that gene didn't exist within the soybean database. So it had to be incorporated through genetic engineering. So both are very valuable tools. They have different regulatory paths, but I think they're revolutionary in our ability to use biodiversity to create new solutions in agriculture, no?
Interesting. So we've got meat going into plants. What about plant-based meats, Majed? And talk a little bit about the alternative meat investments you're doing and what you're hoping that will lead to.
So we made our brand Nabati, where we're exposed to plant-based meats, and we've seen a large consumer shift towards plant-based, where you can indulge the proteins, the taste, the texture, but still be plant-based and be more healthy. I wouldn't rely health to meat or protein, but some consumers do so. So we see a large shift in that towards that sector, and we think this will change a lot of dynamics in foods, as well as cell-based and cultivated meats, where we noticed that today you cannot tell the difference of the taste between the cell-based and, I would say, the natural meat. So we see in the future that this will take maybe a large portion of the market based on the current consumer demands in that sector.
Mario, I want you to tackle a question around climate resilience versus adaptation. Where are we focusing most of our efforts when we think about food, and is that the right amount of investment?
I think there's a great advancement on mitigation when we talk about payment for ecosystem services that is very helpful for financing. But I do believe that we need a deeper look into resilience and adaptation, as the amount of extreme weather events have been increasing, and usually we as human beings, we stop to think after the disaster. So I think there's a lot of work to be done on prediction, not only on modeling, but also on financial instruments, including insurance. The insurance penetration in Latin America is still very low. So I do believe that we need to balance better mitigation with adaptation strategies.
Have we got some questions from the audience for our esteemed panel? We've got a microphone here. Any questions? I've got lots, but always happy to open it up. Okay, we've got one in the front right here.
Thank you. Mike, I'm from Canada, but my question will be about Africa. What's the potential for Africa to be the quote-unquote breadbasket or protein basket, or fish protein for its own continent and for the rest of the world?
Okay. Joe, do you want to tackle that?
Yeah, happily. So the potential for Africa is almost difficult to think about in terms of the magnitude. You've probably seen these graphics where all the continent, or many of the continents of the world, are pasted onto Africa. So of course it's got most of the world's remaining arable land. But we need business models combined with cooperation with government organizations. We need better software to be able to get into those opportunities, to unlock all that. In Africa alone, in the sector that we're in on white protein, we're a 70 million revenue business, the leader on the continent, in a $40 billion demand scenario.
Right.
So our first focus is, of course, to just grow as fast as we can. I mean, we're doubling in size this year, but we definitely see our cost structure over the coming year or two as becoming cost competitive on a global basis for white protein. So I think that the answer is, as we partner and scale to address this $40 billion gap at home, we will become competitive to serve global markets.
Anyone else want to talk about Africa?
I think in South America, we have an ecosystem that is very close to some parts of Africa. So there is a lot of technology that can be exported, a lot of technology that can be shared from South America to Africa. I think the main challenge is that, and that we face that in South America, is that development happens when the governments are not interfering. And I think this is vital for having Africa catching up with the technology that is already in place, and a lot of them can be adopted from Brazil, from Argentina, from Colombia, that are really, really advanced and advanced on its own.
Want to tackle that, Mari?
No, I second what Fernando said. In the tech perspective, is the same thing. There's a lot of things that can be directly transferred when we look into the arable land. And even when you talk about supply chain, coffee, for example, is one supply chain that has been monitored in Brazil with a lot of demand from African players to expand. But I do think that in addition to everything we have been discussing here on the food sector, Africa has also a work to develop on the tech sector as well, to have more entrepreneurs locally to do this work of transferring knowledge from Latin America and implement it.
I mean, we have to bring international trade agreements into this, right? Because there's the potential for Africa to become the breadbasket of the world, but we also have international trade agreements which are restricting countries from doing just that, right? I mean, I know that, that for example, Federico, that it takes quite a long time for some of the technology to get a grip somewhere, because you have to deal with regulation, not just in where the science is born, but where the science is going to be put into place, right?
Yeah, I think, unfortunately, what makes the journey very long. Sometimes it's not just the biological constraint, as I said before, but also the complexity in the regulatory systems. There's no synchronicity, where if you get something validated in the States, you could say, okay, that works for Europe, works for China. No, you have to redo things in every single country, sometimes from scratch. And these frameworks often change. For instance, in Europe, if I want to have a biopesticide in the market, I might need 10 years of work with the regulatory authorities to get that finally approved. We have cases of products that took 15 years to get approved. Now, at the end of the day, that makes technology expensive. It's not the patents, it's not the IP, the regulatory systems and the unnecessary scrutiny on things that have already been scrutinized, at least at the core level. So I think the world as a whole will significantly benefit by having at least some common ground in terms of minimum standards. Maybe at the UN level, I don't know what the institutional pathway would be, right, so that we can accelerate the path to market of technologies that have significant regulatory hurdles.
I imagine that beef is quite political and gets tangled up in international trade as well, Fernando.
Oh, definitely. I think there are a few things that I would like to comment on FTAs. First, we try to form blocks, to negotiate with blocks. More and more, we believe that the free trade agreements or the trade agreements, they have to be bilateral. Take our bloc, that's Mercosur, is such an heterogeneous bloc that you cannot have a single alignment on where to negotiate and how to negotiate. Take an example. We have Paraguay that recognized Taiwan as an independent country that closes the door to China, and vice versa. So having a free trade agreement, negotiation as a bloc, becomes much more complicated. This is one thing. Second thing that I think is very relevant is that tariffs, quotas, it's very, very against the food security that we are looking for. It's very against having access to affordable food for any social class, but especially for the lower social classes. The percentage of a family budget that goes into food in the developing countries reaches 40, 50%. It's different from the developed countries that's 7, 8%. So if you have taxes and it's affecting and creating inflation and 40, 50% where your family budget goes, you really create a problem. So I think that we have, one of the things is that natural resources that are available to produce food are in different regions than the consuming places. We have to have, and we have to migrate to a much more free trade world that allows people to consume. We will fight famine with a reduction of taxes and making food affordable anywhere in the world.
Interesting. Okay. Another question from the audience? How's the MENA region doing in terms of the agreements for the movement of food in particular? And I know that, you know, if you're a vertical farm in Saudi Arabia, how easy is it to move my goods to the UAE, for example?
So I think what MENA is looking for today is how do we reduce, we're more looking to self-sufficiency. How do we reduce the carbon? How do we have reduction of emission waste? So that being said, many, like the vertical farming, we see the UAE becoming more self-sufficient, Saudi becoming more self-sufficient. However, if we look on the other side, we see a lot of trade agreements with neighboring countries. And our portfolio rely heavily on many imports from countries like Oman. We export a lot to the UAE, and the trade with Egypt and Jordan is very essential. So we see two things. We see heavy trade agreements, easiness of trade, but at the same time we see technology evolving to ensure sustainable countries and reduction of CO2 and emissions in general.
Okay. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about waste, because the waste within crops is still incredibly significant. I know, Federico, you have ideas around how we could better manage crops where the waste is located, how it's managed, what we would do with it?
Well, there's one concept of waste that is often associated to logistics in the horticultural value chain, which is very straightforward. But there's another concept of waste that's probably underlooked, which is the following, and I'll give you an example. For every ton of corn that is produced in a field, there's a ton of above ground biomass that is lost in 6 months through decomposition. Now, the organic carbon load of that ton of grain and that ton of above ground biomass is the same. Mm-hmm. So if we were able to capture that biomass before it decomposes, we can double the yield on a per unit basis. No, it's everything else being equal. Now, what is the challenge to be able to capture that organic carbon before it decomposes? Is that we need to decentralize the transformation process. Mm. We need to transform that into a fermentable sugar that can then be rerouted into proteins, carbohydrates, or fatty acids, or anything else we might need before it's volatilized or lost to CO2. And that forces us to rethink the way we are industrializing agricultural raw materials. So I think there's a thesis here about decentralizing or descaling manufacturing that becomes relevant if we want to unlock the value of what today is being lost to degradation in major row crops.
We can't talk about emissions without talking about cows. Talk about how regenerative agriculture, Fernando, can help in terms of reducing emissions from cattle.
Right. I think the waste example is a very good one. Brazil and South America, they use the waste of other agricultural products to feed the cattle. Example, if you are producing ethanol out of corn, the DDG, what's left, it's being given to the cattle to grow. But what's interesting is that in our process of producing beef and producing the meat, everything that's left, we cook and we separate the solid by the liquid. The liquid is tallow. Tallow is one of the main and most efficient raw material to produce sustainable aviation fuel. So we use waste of other agricultural products to feed our cattle, and we use the waste of the cattle to produce sustainable aviation fuel. So this creates a system, a cycle that is really, really very efficient on decarbonization and using the advantage, the natural advantages that you have on that particular region.
Joe, how do you think about waste? I know that without refrigerators, you've got to get the fish to the right place for it to be sold. How do you think about waste when you think about white protein?
Sure, yeah, so on the distribution side, there's almost no waste because we have, it's very, very efficient. There's almost no spoilage, it's almost zero. But on the production side, we've developed a zero waste model for the water that we use, so, and the fish waste. And so what happens when the water gets pumped into a pond, the fish grow, the fish produce eggs, and then that wastewater, we've worked with the community and set up with hundreds of partners a rewilding program which both plants indigenous trees, so it's producing, not only is it producing a biodiversity output for our biodiversity positive goal, but those local trees actually have inputs for our feed mill. So our waste from the fish is literally going to produce biomass, create jobs in the local community, and then it ends up in our feed mill. So there's no waste in our cycle. Okay, interesting. So you're doing what Francisco's talking about in the water. Final thought from you, Mari. Talk a little bit about with the farmers that you work with. How does the software help them to manage the waste as well? What's the opportunity there?
So in emerging markets, most of the food waste comes from the production side. So like for agronomic management, harvesting in the wrong timing. So having the information allows farmers, for example, when we heard about the heavy rains on the Rio Grande do Sul floods, we were able to alert farmers on time so they would advance harvesting in order to avoid losses. So I think there is a big part to be tackled by information and agronomic management, but there is also a side that is about market access. So sometimes in terms of the quality of the food is the same, but the appearance is not the same. or distribution access. In Brazil, also cold chains is a challenge, especially for berries and on other crops. So I still believe there's still space for disruptors and innovators to connect better farmers to distribution and market opportunities.
Fantastic. Well, I'm not sure there's any issue within the future of food that we haven't tackled today. We've done emissions, we've done waste, we've done market access. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us here, and thank you to the audience for being with us.